Hi everyone. Welcome to the session. Today we are talking about paid marketing. I know we've just got a little minute here. I'm going to give folks another minute to stream in and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, folks, looks like we're all here. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Um, Today, we are talking about paid marketing and driving virtual engagement, especially through digital advertising. That's going to be the main thing that we talk about today. And we'll have some time at the end for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and will be sent out. So feel free to leave some of your questions towards the end. My name is Amanda. I am the communications manager at Spur Local, and I'm excited to talk to you about this today. So let's dive in. So when it comes to things like paid marketing, before we kind of dive into what it means to plan out our campaigns and how that becomes part of our marketing and communication strategy, just some general guidance in terms of how you can think about this and approach this as part of your strategy. Um, the main thing when it comes to paid marketing to just consider is that yes, paid marketing is a tool. It is channels that you can use to get new audiences, to engage existing audiences, and thinking about the content that you're creating for your campaigns is also going to be what defines so much of the success of your paid marketing. So when it comes to what exactly you're going to be running as your campaigns, there are a couple things to just kind of keep in the back of your mind. One, focusing on posts that actually already have engagement with your audience. That's going to be a big thing. So when you look at, for instance, running social media ads, one of the things that you can start to do is just thinking through what are some of the organic pieces of content that are already doing well with your audiences. Something that you can do before you ever run paid ads is just trying different ways of talking about the recent work that you've done, the recent impact that you have, your stories, and your success metrics and statistics, and just seeing, is a carousel or a video something that engages your audience best? Are there certain ways or stories that you're telling that already get the most traction with your folks? Those are some of the pieces of content that you can then use to run some of your paid ad campaigns, knowing that you've already seen some success elsewhere. When it comes to the call to action piece, you want to make sure that every single campaign that you're running always has one very clear call to action. And this is especially important when it comes to something like a paid ad, especially if you're reaching an audience that doesn't already know about you. You always want to set up your campaign so that they have one specific thing that they know you're asking them to do. And this can be more than just donating, right? It could be reading or learning more. It can be taking an action to share about your organization. It can be signing up to volunteer or signing up to attend an event from your organization. It can be taking a small action like signing a petition or doing some other form of advocacy. I think that when it comes to looking at how people schedule their ad campaigns year round, you see the most expensive ads tend to run towards end of year because that is when a lot of other people are bidding. So just keeping that in mind, is there any way that you can spread out your paid marketing throughout the rest of the year so that, say, in January, you're running an email list campaign and getting folks to sign up for your email list? They become a warm audience to you. And that way, when you switch to asking them, say, for your end of fiscal year fundraising campaign, it can feel a little less transactional. When you're thinking about making the ask, another thing that is useful here, just to note on peer-to-peer and how to use that in your marketing, is user-generated content. If you have stories that feature a single person, maybe other volunteers, about why they volunteer with you. Those are the kinds of things that feel really good when you see in an ad campaign, because they, one, feature one clear subject, two, have one clear call to action that relates to the story that you're telling, and three, build some social proof, right? People like to see other people, especially on platforms like social media. So how can you be using some of that content that you may have already gotten from your community members? Another way to kind of generate some social proof and to reuse some of the content you may be doing is if you have a blog article, if you've gotten a recent award, if you've been mentioned in an article in the news or anything like that, how can you be running that as part of your ad campaign just so that you can build some social proof with audiences who maybe don't already know about you, but who know the Washington Post, right? It kind of helps build that sense of credibility and familiarity from the very beginning. So those are some general guiding points. And then now let's dive into what exactly is paid marketing? What are some of the nitty-gritty things that you're thinking about as you start to plan out this work? So mainly when we talk about paid marketing for today's session, it's going to be digital advertising. Here are 4 channels that tend to be most common for people using paid marketing, especially for a small nonprofit setting. Search. This is something that you can do with, for instance, the Google Ads grant for nonprofits that offers $10,000 a month for free for nonprofits and Google Ads credits. But essentially, you can be one of the top results when someone is searching for an organization. And this is especially useful if you're trying to reach an audience that's new to you, so cold audience, because they're people who are most likely to already be invested because they're searching for you. They're in the mindset of wanting to find you. You have social media. Social media ads tend to help you kind of broaden the visibility and your reach on social media. We'll get into this a little bit later. There's some pros and cons. There's some things that you just want to know, especially for platforms like Meta. But in general, it's kind of a way for you on these platforms to cut through a little bit of the noise. You have display ads, so ads that show up on screens like websites and banners. And I will add to this category also that you can look at doing display ads on local news sites. So just in the DMV area, some local news that have media kits online that you can see how much those packages are, what they tend to do, are places like Washington City Paper, Moco 360, just as a couple of examples. And then for influencers, getting other people who already have existing audiences to be promoting you. And we will dive more deeply into this as well, but that is also another channel where you can do things like sponsored content as part of your digital marketing strategy. So before we kind of get started, even just planning out your campaign, the biggest thing that will help define some of the success of your campaign is knowing your audience. The draw of having digital advertising is that you're able to target more specifically and in a very granular level to the people that you really want to be reaching. A big part of that, especially for local nonprofit organizations, is going to be location, right? Where does your audience mainly live? Is this kind of around you where you're working? Do you already have addresses or neighborhoods or zip codes based on the data for your audience that you have that you can specifically try to target within a certain like 2-3 mile radius? The more specific you can get with your location targeting, the more efficient your ad spend will be. I've had examples where, even myself accidentally ran campaigns that are not just in the DMV, right? And you get a huge amount of reach, but those people are not clicking through, those people are not signing up to come to an event that's not in their state. So you just want to be really careful when you're doing this targeting upfront. And again, like I said, this is often the number one factor in ads working. And by working, I specifically mean in seeing your return on the ad spend that you're investing in. The second kind of level for audiences to think about is just who they are. Demographics is often a good factor to consider here. And within demographics, data like age is useful because that also helps to determine which platforms you're using. There is a different age group that is primarily on Facebook versus on Instagram versus on TikTok, for example. So that is just a good factor to keep in the back of your mind. And then lastly, kind of extrapolating from demographics and also from your existing audience, what are some of their behaviors? When you get to things like social media targeting, you can get really specific on the kinds of behaviors that they've already kind of classified and that they track as pieces of data. So what are your audiences interested in? What are they looking for? What do they care about? And I think you can also get really creative here, right? It is not just about being interested in philanthropy, being interested in your specific issue area, but also thinking through, if you're advertising an event, can it be people who are more likely to sign up for events on Facebook? Because that is a behavior category that Meta allows you to choose. So just thinking through things like that, if your event has, local food vendors, is that something that you can choose that might be interesting to people? What are some of the different angles, that might kind of make up this audience profile that you're building? I will also note that on social media, and if you're already putting tracking on your website, that you can start targeting your warm audiences first. So on social media, you can do something where you target your existing followers, existing people who've engaged with your content before. On your website, if you're running things like Google Tag Manager and you're tracking the demographic of people that visit your site, you can then kind of use that to build out your warm audience for people searching for you, or for display ads and things like that. So that is always a good place to start if you're not sure. And if you are completely kind of new to this and you're just starting to think about it, one way to start getting that data is really to just install some of these trackers and then get some of the data that you can then extrapolate to use for your future targeting. So it doesn't all have to happen at once. So getting into social media ads, this tends to be the most common approach because the budgets can be really low. You don't have to, spend hundreds of dollars right away that not a lot of us have in our communications budgets. You can always start with something like $2 a day, right? And just seeing how that goes. The ads that I've run on social media that I found to be successful have been just for $30 at a time to get people to come out to an event. So you can kind of start to see what budget you have, where you're able to use that, and experiment, see what works. I will say that on things like social media, Meta is a platform that tends to have the lowest cost. So it's the least, barrier to entry when it comes to social media. You have also platforms like LinkedIn, TikTok, Reddit. You can try on these other platforms. I will say that on LinkedIn, there is a different type of targeting that you can do. You can target audiences by occupation, by company, by industry. So LinkedIn, I think if you have a specific type of person that you're trying to reach, if you have lists that you built of companies that you're intending to, and you have an ask that is very specific to that audience, that might work for you. But for most of us, Meta is kind of the place to start when it comes to the least amount of ad spend that we can have that might be successful, and just a playground to see what works and what doesn't. And most of us already have, Facebook, Instagram accounts, and so you already have some of those audiences that you can use to start targeting. But on Meta specifically, when you create your ads, one thing to look out for when it comes to platforms is that you can set up ads for Facebook, for Instagram, and for Messenger. So one thing to start looking at when you get data on some of your ad campaigns is just seeing where are people engaging with you, right? This ties back to your demographics. Are most of your folks engaging with you on Instagram? Because if so, and if that's the audience you're trying to reach, you really don't need to be running ads on Facebook and Messenger. You can uncheck those for your next campaign and get more efficient with where you're spending your ad money. So those are just some things to kind of keep in mind. When it comes to social media also, I will say just general rules of thumb that I found to be successful is trying it more than once. Really, Meta tends to also inflate their numbers. I mean, when it comes to deciding your return on investment, we do what we can, right? You never really know what exactly the reach means out of context. Like that number can be as big or as small. The most important thing is just like getting to set your baselines so that you can see if there are any major fluctuations and patterns over time. That's going to be, I found, where most of the best use of your data will come from. So trying it more than once so that you can do testing, you can create campaigns that target different audiences and see which audience that you're running ads to is actually engaging or converting. You can try out different designs. You can have one ad be video, one ad be carousel, one ad be a static post, and just see what works best. So, using it kind of as a testing ground is really some of the best uses, especially if you have some lower ad spend. And then taking it slow, because when you're testing, you want to be able to say, my hypothesis is that people on Instagram will engage most with this post or with this type of ad. You want to give it time to see if that is actually coming true, and then seeing if it works for you. That's where you can start to increase your budget. That's where you can start to make this a larger priority for your marketing strategy overall. The third tip is just knowing your goal. And this goes back to kind of the metrics, how you're defining success, what exactly you're tracking. So in these orders, awareness, engagement, and action or conversion, these tend to be how ads are less or more expensive. Awareness ads tend to be the least expensive versus engagement ads. So for instance, getting someone to click on a link, and then finally conversion, so getting someone to donate. So just keeping that in mind, that can be something that you use to vary your strategy across the year, so that you're running more awareness ads at the beginning of the year, having a little bit of spend, getting your warm audiences, seeing what works, refining that over time. And then as things get more expensive with other people competing for attention towards the end of the year, you already have a lot of that you can use to build off of and work with. So when it comes to awareness as a goal, ads can really help you get your name and your brand in front of an audience, whether this is a new audience, so folks who are kind of a cold audience to you, or a warm audience if you're using it to retarget people that have already heard about you or are already familiar with you. And again, just kind of focusing on specifics, so like geography, demographics, behaviors, things like that. That's where that can really help you. When it comes to the engagement goal, ads can also help you engage in a way that is not just about donating. So having it be, for instance, signing up for your email list. Is there a way where you already have content that you can use to run something like a lead generation campaign, where, say, you're an organization that has a lot of gardening resources, right? You can create maybe a one-pager or some kind of packet or a quiz even, to just kind of get folks to see your organization and connect your mission and your work with something that they're already thinking about. This can be useful for cold audiences. If you're an organization that has recipes, could you run a holiday recipe book as kind of something that you're offering to people to sign up to your email? And then from there, once people are on your email, using that email list to start converting them. I think when it comes to looking at your metrics for engagement, moving into conversion. So engagement would be the number of people that click through the link on your ad, right? You have the number of click-throughs. And then for conversion, you would have the number of people from there who actually sign up for your email list. One thing to just kind of think through is half of the success comes from your ad campaign. So how people perceive your ads, what makes them want to click. And then half of it comes when they click. What is the link that you're directing people to? That is the other half of the experience that really does affect your end result. So if you're noticing that, for instance, you have a lot of people clicking through your ads, but they're not signing up for something or they're not donating, kind of run it through yourself and see, is the ad related to the landing page that you're sending people to? Is there any way you can make that process a little smoother? Are the expectations or branding or anything like that changing between your ad versus, say, your website that you're sending folks to? Making that page clear and inviting, making it kind of focused on that one call to action that you're asking people to take, all of that helps with increasing the number of conversions you end up getting. So that speaks to kind of that conversion piece. And when it comes to running ads about donating, it follows kind of a similar thing. If you're sharing stories through your ad campaigns, is there any way that you can make sure that your fundraising page or your donation page continues to expand on some of those stories so that it looks visually familiar, it's not jarring for people to transition between those platforms, and there's a clear call to action. There's one specific donation button that people, using the language that people have already seen from your ad campaign. Those are things that you can kind of think about as you run through your entire campaign. I will say for the website piece of things, one tool that can be useful is a free tool called Microsoft Clarity, where you just embed a line of code on your website and it can heat map your site for you so that you can see for the people who get to that page, where are they clicking? How far are they scrolling? Where are you losing people's attention? If you're running things like search ads, this is also where having the Google Tag Manager uh, line of code on your website helps as well, because you can see where people are bouncing from your website, how long people are spending on your page, things like that. All of those pieces of data are also useful alongside the actual ad data that you're getting in these platforms. The second thing is just kind of what it looks like to go beyond social. So starting to talk about search, right? Google Ads is definitely one of the most common ones for a lot of us because they have the Google Ad Grant that, as I said earlier, has $10,000 a month for nonprofits to be able to use. I have found that the Google platform for training has actually been very, very useful. They run through in a very thorough way how to set up your campaigns, especially if you have Google Ad Grants, how to set up your smart campaigns, how to set up conversion tracking. Uh, Google also has something when you're running it called an ad quality score, where you can see how to better optimize your ad campaigns as well as your landing pages. For Google, what I found that they really tend to emphasize is your conversion tracking. So it does take a little bit of time upfront to make sure that you've set that up correctly. If you have websites that you're using things like WordPress or Squarespace or Wix, it shouldn't be, it is pretty user friendly and they have instructions for that that you can go through. But just taking some time upfront, knowing that one, you want to be looking at your conversion tracking and how to install that, and two, doing keyword research. So what are people already searching for to find your organization or to find organizations like yours? That takes a little bit of time up front, but once you get that running and you set up most of your campaigns, especially evergreen campaigns, since search tends to take a longer time frame than social media ads, for instance, it can be pretty repeatable. So it's a good time saver once you've already set that initial investment up front. Google is also another network for display ads. Here, what's important are just really strong visuals, especially because banner ads tend to be, when people click through, it's like one big splashy thing. It's very different from social media and from text-based search ads in that sense. And I will say here also that Google AdSense, they have training for that. That is a good platform to just kind of see what are some examples of ads that work well in other industries and in this industry as well. Keeping it to one splashy visual, one main call to action, and having a good hook that's just a phrase or one sentence or one line about your organization and that specific campaign you're trying to run. And then lastly, going to influencers. We see this a lot in, obviously for-profit companies that are able to do sponsored content for influencers. There are more limited examples for nonprofits being successful with this, but I will say that the DMV especially has a lot of hyper-local influencers with niche audiences that are already engaged and that tend to be very values aligned with the work that you're doing. So what we're seeing from organizations like Social Current, which has good resources for how to approach local influencers and set up some of those partnerships, is that influencers themselves are currently creating their own digital and in real life communities. I see a lot of influencers moving towards hosting events for their people, moving towards getting folks to sign up for their email list, right? So the strategy here right now, what we're seeing is less about just offering sponsored content and more about building long-term relationships with these influencers. Something that has worked for us in the past is just sending an email with a quick pitch that shows, one, that you've done your research on this influencer, what their target audience is, what type of content tends to resonate with them, and then connecting that pitch to what your organization does. So not only are you values aligned, but you are a resource for them in creating the kinds of content and communities that they want. So how can you be, one, not just kind of cultivating that long-term relationship with them, but two, pitching ideas that are not only about content, but also thinking through, in terms of integrating a larger communications piece, the narrative messaging that you really want to be sharing with them as a resource, any events that you could be partnering on together, any promotions for discounted tickets to these events, just as a couple of examples. And then the final thing, before we kind of go through a quick summary of today's webinar and open up for some questions, is thinking about omni-channel or multi-channel marketing. And I know at Spurlocal we say this a lot. One, it helps with our capacity because we're able to reuse pieces of content or pillars of content in multiple different places. And two, it really does work with retention because a lot of audiences are seeing many different things on many different platforms, right? So as our landscape kind of becomes more and more fragmented, how are you putting the same types of content onto different channels so that people are seeing more of it in different places and really making sure that message is sticky for people? Social, like I mentioned, is a great one, especially because a lot of us are already using it. Email is another good one, making sure your audience is getting emails from you, making sure that if you're asking for people to sign up for your email list, can you also on the back end be setting up an automated welcome series to keep those folks engaged, to move them from a new audience member to a potential advocate or a potential donor. With emails also, there are local emails where you can place ads in their emails. For example, CityCast DC, 730 DC. You can consider buying a list of emails. That is a different option as well. And just really knowing what exactly that email list does, who that email audience is really useful for just knowing how you're going to be shaping the content to really make a difference and be a hook for those people. And then, tracking all of these, right? Targeting as specific of an audience as you can get, knowing for yourself what the goals are for your specific campaign and how that feeds into your larger strategy for your organization overall. So finally, we'll just kind of go through a quick summary for today. Starting with your budget, how much do you have to spend on your ads? That tends to be one of the deciding factors from the outset to choose which platforms you then end up going on. Second is prioritizing. Which platforms are the ones that make the most sense for you right now? Where are people already? Who are the audiences you're trying to get? What are some of the messaging that works for those platforms? 3, doing some experimentation, doing some testing, trying some small, ad campaigns with small budgets and just seeing where that goes. 4 is some research, taking the time to see what other folks are doing. Something that I do for myself as well is just every time I am looking at something and I see an ad that hooks me, I immediately make sure that I'm screenshotting things, that I'm keeping it in a folder and writing it down so that I know what works. I go through the entire experience and see what is something that I can take as inspiration for myself. Number 5 is just goals, setting up some of your goals for the next 6 months. And then this leads into number 6, your data. So being able to start having some of that audience data, having some of those engagement metrics, conversion metrics. And again, this is also a good place to start if you're feeling a little overwhelmed. This is something that's new to you. You can always start to collect that data piece first before doing some experimentation and then using that to refine your future ad campaigns. So I will pause there and just see if there are any questions from folks today. We have a question that came through. How do we buy email lists? That is a great question. There are a couple of different platforms, for instance, like companies like Sturista, as an example, that are specifically meant to be selling email lists. And then a similar question, where have you found success with purchasing these lists? I will say it really depends on the campaign that you're trying to run. It depends on how much you're willing to spend and how much you're using these email lists. Once you purchase the lists, often in our experience, companies will not just be running those campaigns for you, but they will also give you the data back to say, these are the people that have clicked on the links in that email, right? And the ones that are most successful are the ones with one specific call to action, with one very, very clear ask. And one that already connects to what folks are thinking about. Often when you're purchasing lists, it tends to be cold audiences that you're reaching out to. So how can you build that familiarity with them almost from the outset. It needs to be a really strong hook. So that's for the content side of things. When it comes to the data side of things, once folks give you back some of that data on who is clicking, you can then run that back to say, these are now people in my audience who I can be retargeting with other ads. There are some platforms like Meta, also LinkedIn, where you can then upload email lists to start retargeting those people with social media ads based on, cookies on the internet, right? So there are a couple of different ways that you can kind of like reuse some of that data. Um, and it just depends on, one, what your campaign is, what your ask is. If you're able to like build that into a pipeline for making sure that people who are cold audiences can then become audiences for you, and that you have that data to be able to reuse, because sometimes they can be a little bit expensive when you're purchasing from the beginning. So great question. We're a little over time today, so thank you all again for coming to this webinar. We are going to be sending out the slides and the recording after this. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to the Spur Local team at any time. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.